So I actually volunteered to Karis to do a 3-minute talk on this, and she generously gave me 15 minutes. So thanks, Karis, I think. Anyway, this is some work that I did, it's a couple of years ago now, together with Phil Graham from New South Wales DPI. Some of you might know Phil, but anyway, it comes off the back of a larger project that Phil was involved with called Southern Livestock Adaptation 2030. There we go. So that project is finished now for several years now, but Phil was a key person in it. It was a big collaborative project, and the website is still there. It's a really good website that I would commend to you. But basically what they did in that project was a lot of modelling of climate change and livestock production at over 80 locations in southeast Australia, where they're looking at the impact of climate change, forecast climate changes to 2030. So what the results found was, most of the scenarios suggest higher temperatures and less rainfall. And what that actually means in terms of pasture production is lower soil moisture, shorter growing seasons, and so on. So, and they also saw that increased variability. So small temperature and rainfall variations can have a big impact on profit. Following on from that, lower rainfalls were the worst, hardest hit, and some cold, wet and elevated areas like where I'm from might actually benefit. They also looked a lot at how various adaptations can help reduce the impact. So some of those adaptations we've got here, so there's a category that falls, it's like strategies to reduce the loss of ground cover. So that's about protecting the feed base. And the big one there was actually increased soil fertility. There's been a trend for less fertiliser over some years now, but that was a big one. And other things like to do with legumes and feedlots and improved pasture varieties. So that's making sure that the feed base is maintained. Now, genetic improvement, on the other hand, can make a contribution in terms of more efficient feed use. So that's what we're interested in here, and what we wanted to do, what we went on to do was to look at breeding objectives and indexes for merinos. We looked at it under a local level, under predicted climate changes to 2030. So the way we did that was we used the GrassGro modelling tool, and that's Tim wondered if we had a model like his in Australia, and I think this is kind of it, although it really is tailored towards the pasture side of things more than the animal production side. But we used that model for 3 locations. So they were Walbrook up near Armidale, Yass and Narrandera. You can see the variable rainfall across those regions there, and when we do the GrassGro runs for the initial setup, these are the DSE ratings per hectare at the current in the current climate. So. And then we run it again with, just a bit about how that's actually calculated. So what Phil did was he imposed a restriction into GrassGro so that there was a constant ground cover rule, so that of 70% over across the seasons. And so the first column there is the stocking rate under that scenario in the current climate between 1960 and 2013. And then this one here, what he's done is he's taken predicted weather data for 2030 out of this thing called GCM, which that's the GCM means it's called a global circulation model. So it's a climate model that comes out of the Hadley Climate Centre. That's the HADGM part in the UK. so that you can put in any location in the world and it'll give you back predictions of temperature and rainfall, like daily weather records for 2030. So put that data back into GrassGro and kept the restriction of 70% ground cover, and you can see that stocking rate falls there due to a reduction in pasture production. You know, we need to have lower stocking rates to maintain that ground cover. So having done that, we also modelled both wool and dual purpose enterprises at all three locations, but the most relevant ones were to look at, I'm just covering this talk, is wool enterprises at Woolbrook and Yass and a dual purpose one at Narrandera. Okay, so these are the changes in profitability at the DSC level. So there's the current figures there, and you can see per DSC, like small reductions at Woolbrook and Yass, and a fairly large reduction at Narrandera. Remember that this modelling showed that hotter, drier areas were more susceptible. Okay, so that was the start of it. What we then went on to do was to use GrassGro to actually derive some breeding objectives and indexes from them. And we looked at a simple set of traits that, you know, the GrassGro model is a bit limited for the animal side of the equation, so we could only really model fleece weight, fibre diameter, mature weight and reproduction. We couldn't model early growth rate, for example. So we made indexes based on the GrassGro model, tailored to each of those three regions, and then calculated gains from index selection on those particular indexes. So, and these are the index gains that we predicted out to 2030. And you can see at Woolbrook, it's basically most of the improvements coming from fibre diameter. Yass, it's more from fleece weight, and Narrandera, remember, that was a dual purpose enterprise, so we're getting bigger gains on body weight and reproduction. Just note that those, because we couldn't put a weight on emphasis on early growth, that the change in adult weight at Woolbrook and Yass in these wool enterprises is actually negative. But so those trait changes add up to changes in profitability down the bottom here, dollars per DSE. But I also say that we compared those local objectives indexes with what the standard Merino Select indexes are, and they line up pretty well actually. So in this case, the Woolbrook one lines up with the fibre production index, so you can see the big reduction in fibre diameter. Yass with the Merino production index, and Narrandera with the dual purpose index. I've already spoken about the changes of immature weight there. So in terms of the capacity for adaptation from genetic improvement, we can see that those changes in profitability do allow us to make more efficient use of the feed base. So if we look here, there's the current gross margins per DSC, the drop, which we've already seen out to 2030. But if we put genetic improvement on top of that, we get that loss back at both Woolbrook and Yass, and not quite for Narrandera. But just we need to keep in mind that that's gross margin per DSE. Bottom line really is gross margin per hectare, and remember that the DSE ratings have fallen, so on a per hectare basis, the indexes are not quite getting back up to the current production level. So, and again, we see that falls off across the environment. So in terms of how much the genetic improvements getting you back of what you might lose, 74% in Woolbrook, back to 38% in Yass, and not very much in Narrandera. So more adaptation is necessary. Apart from the genetic improvement, it certainly helps, but need to counter the loss of the feed base. So. Okay, so that's the sort of productivity side of things. We also need to think of other ways that the livestock themselves might have to adapt to climate change, and I've just got a few things listed here. Methane emission reduction, perhaps you might not think that that's all that important, but there's a lot of work going on in ruminants around the world on that issue. But the good thing for producers is that it's quite highly related to feed efficiency. So if you're putting out less methane, it's more, there's a gain in food efficiency, and there is some work going on in that in Australia. Also heat tolerance and disease resistance. It's also likely under forecast climate changes that the impact of disease may be worse. Anyway, just to finish off, so what we've seen is that under the predicted climate changes can lead to reduced productivity in sheep enterprises caused by lower pasture production, and that's going to be worse in low rainfall regions, and that we need to counter that. Adaptations are necessary to recover the lost production. So, and genetic improvement is a key adaptation. We looked at those objectives at a local level and found that they could recover some of the lost productivity, and that they also reconcile well with our current merino indexes. So that's a good thing. And of course, just a final statement that whenever we're talking about genetic improvement, it's about future productivity, and that we need to be thinking about matching our objectives to the environments of the future. So thanks very much.
Question, I guess, between you and Daniel, but that index response looked pretty bad for weaner survival. We're getting 8% increase in greasy fleece weight and -2 kilos for adult weight. That seems like a path to weaner death to me. Just wondering what your thoughts.
Any particular one of those? Or?
Oh, there's a positive genetic correlation between, unfavourable correlation between fleece weight and weaner mortality, and Daniel's what he reported, and the positive or favourable with weight and weaner survival.
Yeah. No, well, like I say, that's it's a fairly simple animal production model in there. Survival is actually in there, and I don't think it really had a big impact, but that's not really accounting for the genetic correlations that Daniel was talking about. So, yes, kind of a simple broad brush analysis that would obviously need to consider that. Doesn't at the moment though.